first shading technique we're going to be learning today is hatching. It is a series of lines drawn closely together to give the illusion of values. One way you can utilize hatching is by drawing the lines close together to create darker values and farther apart to create lighter values, and that's what we're seeing here in the car. The marks are made really close together here on this part of the car, so we're getting a darker value. Here the marks are made further apart, so we're getting a lighter value in the car. We're going to be utilizing line weight pressure and making our marks really close together to create hatching, and I'll explain what that looks like later in the video. It's slightly more challenging, but it creates better results. The next technique we're going to be using is cross hatching, and it is a shading technique in which one set of lines crosses over or overlaps another set. So here in this giraffe, we're seeing lines go in one direction and then a second set of lines going in another direction. A more advanced shading technique that I just want to mention, but we're not going to be learning or using in this class quite yet, is contour hatching or contour cross hatching. And this shading technique is one in which curved hatching lines follow the outlines, contours, and or forms of the drawing subject to accentuate the illusion of a three-dimensional reality. So pretty much you're making cross contour lines really close to one another to create shading marks. This is much more advanced, so this is a technique that we practice in drawing 1 and drawing 2. But for art introduction, we're just going to be using hatching, cross hatching, and the final technique, which is scumbling. This is a shading technique in which random scribbly marks are drawn to create various values. So here we have two really expressive drawings, and scumbling is great to use if you want to have a work that has a lot of emotion in it. And the fun thing about scumbling is that you're literally just scribbling down on the paper, making marks in various directions. One thing that I would avoid is I would avoid doing spirals. Scumbling is not just spirals. I guess you could shade that way, but technically that's not really scumbling. So that's something that we don't really want to do. What we do want to do is have our marks be drawn in various different directions like this. So you can see it's much more random. And this creates a more interesting type of mark than if you were just doing basic spirals. So once again, don't do the spirals. A couple terms that we need to be aware of that we're just reviewing from before are one of the elements of design, and that is shape and form. Whenever you shade an object, you're turning it into a shape or from a shape to a form. Forms are created in drawings by adding shading to transform that shape into the three-dimensional structure, such as this circle becoming a sphere. To help make your objects look more realistic, you have to have a gradation of values. Gradation can also be used as the term graduation, and it just means that it's a continuous or smooth progression of values from dark to light or light to dark. And we're going to be creating value scales today. Value is another element of design that describes the lightness or darkness of a color. And so we're trying to create a value scale that has the darkest darks that go to the lightest light. For an object to look fully three-dimensional, you need to have a full range of values. So we're going to be practicing drawing these full range of values from the darkest points all the way to the lightest ones. And this value scale is exactly what we're going to be striving for. I want to see the darkest values over here and the lightest values up top. All of your marks are going to be made really close to one another. You can see here that they're not being made far apart. They're being made really close together like so. As you draw to your lighter area, you're going to be lifting up the pressure of your pencil. And this is called line weight, and that's what we're going to be learning about next. Before we begin drawing, I want to explain about the different types of drawing pencils there are, in case you would ever want to go out and buy your own drawing pencils, or in case you have me in class again next year. So on each pencil, you're going to see a number and a letter. If you see the letter H, that means hard. Hard means that there is more clay than graphite in the lead. And because there's more clay than graphite, you're going to get a lighter mark. So 4H and 2H pencils are going to be great pencils to use whenever you're sketching out a work. They don't smudge, they're really light to see, and so they erase really easily. If you see the letter B on a pencil, B means black, and that means that there is more graphite than clay in the lead, so you're going to be getting a darker mark. These are pencils like a 6B or a 4B are great for putting in the really dark values in a form, and they can be really smudgy and they're really soft compared to a 4H pencil where the tip of it actually feels harder and a 6B pencil actually feels soft. Now you might see the letter F in there. F just means fine point, and it's kind of a middle pencil between an H and an HB. And with an F pencil, they can get sharpened to a really nice fine point, and they can hold that fine point for a long time. Before you begin shading your value scales today, I want you to practice a line weight technique. Now, line weight refers to how thick or thin a line is. A thick line looks like it's jumping out on the paper, and a thin line looks like it's receding back into the paper. Doing this line weight exercise is going to help you have better control over your marks. So if you don't have a 4H, HB, or 4B pencil, just do it with a regular number 2 HB pencil that you have lying around your house. And what I like you to do is I want you to make 3 line weight exercise rows like you're seeing here. And I'd like you to split each row into 2 parts. The side on the left, or the part on the left, when you draw up, I want you to press hard, and when you draw down, I want you to press light. The part 2 on the right-hand side, when you draw up, I want you to press light, and on your way down, I want you to press hard. There should be a line weight difference where one line looks considerably thicker than the other. You also want to make sure that you have a loop on the top and the bottom. A common mistake is that people only draw 1 loop instead of doing 2. So make sure you have a loop on the top and then the bottom. We should be seeing 2 loops in there. And once again, I should be seeing that line weight difference where one line is thicker, the other line is thinner. After you finish your line weight exercises, draw 3 rectangles for your value scales. Each rectangle should be 3 inches wide and 1 inch tall. The first rectangle, you're going to be using the shading technique hatching. I am lifting up my pencil after every mark, and I'm drawing my lines parallel to one another. It may look like I'm scribbling back and forth, but I'm not. The left-hand side of your value scale is going to be where your darker values are placed. The right-hand side is going to be where your lighter values are placed. So as I'm shading to the right, I am slowly lifting off the pressure of my pencil to create a light value. I want you to notice though how I am still shading all the way to the right. I am pressing as light as possible. Now you're not going to get a perfect value scale in one go. With shading, you have to do a lot of layering. So this is a second layer that I'm adding on. For the darker values, I'm just pressing a little bit harder than I was before. But you always need to have a sharpened pencil. So if your pencil tip starts to get dull, you need to stop and sharpen it. It makes shading a lot easier. So notice with this darker value, I'm only pressing a little bit harder than what I did before. And I'm slowly lifting up the pressure of my pencil as I'm shading to the right. I'm not going much darker. The reason why you only want to go a shade or two darker than what you've done before is that helps with gradation. You'll notice I went a little too dark and now I have that harsh line in there. So I'm gonna have to go back in and try to smooth that over so there's a gradual transition from dark to light, because right now there's a pretty stark shift. So I'm analyzing what I'm doing and I'm going in for another layer. When I'm shading in the dark value section, I am pressing fairly hard. And now that I'm coming up to this area where I have to work on my gradation of values, I'm trying to be a little bit more intentional about creating a more even pressure of values as I'm lifting up my pencil. And this is going to be challenging for a lot of you. you're not going to get it in the first attempt, nor do I expect you to get it in the first attempt. You might have to redraw and erase your value scale a couple different times before you get a smooth transition. So in that value scale, we should see the dark values on the left, the middle gray values in the middle, and then the light values on the right. Anytime you don't see a smooth gradation of values or that smooth transition, you're going to need to go back in there and try to get that smooth transition in. For the second rectangle, I want you to shade using cross-hatching marks. The difference with cross-hatching is that instead of doing one series of parallel lines that are next to one another, you're going to be crossing over or overlapping multiple sets of lines on top of one another. So I'm going in about 3 different directions here, diagonally down to the left, diagonally down to the right, and then vertically up and down, and I'm going to repeat this process. You're using the same technique for hatching, so you're lifting up your pencil after every mark. You're lifting up the pressure of your pencil as you shade to the right. The nice thing is you don't have to continue shading all the way to the right once you get that middle to light value in. You can just start focusing on the darker values. You should still shade the entire rectangle, shade in layers, gradually building up the pressure of your mark, so don't press too hard too fast. Show gradation by gradually transitioning from dark to light, and the value scale should show dark, middle, and light sections. The final technique is scumbling. Remember, with scumbling, you are not to do spirals. You're supposed to scribble in multiple different directions. Now, this is a really fun, kind of free way to shade. You need to still press slightly hard on the left-hand side, but as you draw to the right, you have to have a lot more control with your pencil. Don't press down so hard on it. So when you start getting to that middle value section, give it like a really even middle pressure, and then as you slowly shade to the right, try putting as little pressure down on the paper as possible. Think of it as like you're holding a feather in your hand, and you just want that feather to tickle the surface of the paper. That's the best way to achieve light values. A couple of things you want to avoid. You are not scribbling when you're shading. You have to lift up your pencil after every mark. So notice here, I'm making a mark, I'm lifting up my pencil. These lines are not connected to one another, so don't scribble when you shade. Another thing you want to avoid is having space between your marks. The marks should be made super close together with no space in between. So here you can see space between the marks. We want to avoid that. Now, if you're having a hard time getting a gradation of values where it's not transitioning into one another smoothly, do not take your finger and smudge it across the value scale. I will not give you points if I see this happening, and trust me, I know when students do this, so don't try to fool me and smudge your finger across the value scale. Another common error is that students have a hard time lifting up the pressure. So what we end up getting is a 1 value scale. You're going to need to really slow down and practice pressing hard and lifting up the pressure of your pencil so you get a nice smooth transition like what we're seeing here. So for your assignment the next 2 days, the first thing you have to do is this line weight activity. You should have 3 rows where on the left-hand side, you're pressing hard on the way up and light on the way down. On the right-hand side, you're pressing light on the way up and hard on the way down, and I should see a loop on the top and the bottom. This second part of your assignment is to shade the 3 value scales with hatching, cross-hatching, and scumbling shading techniques. For each value scale, I'm going to be looking to see that you've lifted up your pencil after every mark, that you've lifted up the pressure of your pencil as you shade it to the right to show gradation, to get that transition from dark to light, and to show the 3 different sections of a value scale, the dark, middle, and light. The entire rectangle should be shaded, and you should be shading in layers where you're gradually building up your values by gradually pressing harder and harder to get those darker values last. Keep practicing this until you get a good value scale. Turn in your best work. So if that means that you have to do this a couple of different times before you get your best work, then that's what I would love to see. So good luck, have fun, and let me know if you have any questions.